Hi, everybody, and welcome to Gen Friends. Tonight, we are going to talk about episodes 9 and 10 of Finding Your Roots from this past season, season 5, that we start out with it, and we just haven't gotten to where we've been able to talk about 9 and 10. So we're going to do that. And joining me tonight, I have got Melissa Barker, the archive lady. Hi, Melissa.
Oh, Cheri, how are you?
I am good, and I'm so excited. I haven't seen you in a while. I'm so glad to have you on the show. This is fabulous, and we need your wisdom when it comes to records and archives. So I'm so glad that you're here. And also joining us tonight is the family tree girl. Shelley Murphy is here too. Hi, Shelley.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
So good to have you. We are going to start with episode 9, and they called it The Eye of the Beholder.
Yeah.
And probably because there were more artistic people on this episode, more, people that see the world maybe a little different way than the rest of us do. But all of them were interested in finding out a little bit more about their families. And we are going to start, and I have to be honest and say I did not know any of these 3 people, none of them, but their stories. It's always interesting to hear somebody else's story. And in these 3 cases, they're all from countries that I don't know a lot about their background and their history and what records are available. So it's always interesting to see where they go with these and how they connect to historical events. So we're going to talk about a director, a filmmaker named Alejandro Inarritu, and I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name correctly.
I was gonna check with you.
So I apologize if I say it wrong. But he said we're all made up of what has happened before. And isn't that so true? We really are. And as we go back through the generations, we start going, no wonder somebody was this way, or I'm this way, or whatever it might be. Those connections are there. He discovered that he had a lot of ancestors that were lawyers or worked in the Supreme Court in the country in Mexico and things like that. And one of them, and they were showing him photos, which was great because he didn't know these stories at all, which happens to most of us until we, start looking into it. We don't know the stories. He had his grandfather, so was his maternal grandfather, was actually on the Supreme Court in one of the counties of Mexico. And he was really happy to see that some of the workers were, wanting their rights or protesting and wanted some rights. And he signed off on that paper and he agreed with them and they were able to get the rights. And he was like, that's great. He did something really good. And we always want to know our ancestors did something really good.
It's amazing.
Really meaningful too.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Or that you find, I don't know if you saw the posting that I posted a little picture the other day. My DAR chapter gave me an apron, and on the apron it said, you have who in your family, or you found who in your family.
I love that.
And
oops.
I'm gonna get it for you. Can you see it?
Oh, that's great. I love that.
And thinking about finding judges and, like you said, the civil rights or whatever it is, it's something cute like that. And it said, you found whom in your family tree. That's what it was. And they're all laughing.
That's great. Well, his fourth great grandfather, they were telling him that he had a connection to Santa Anna, and then he got really nervous because he's like, nobody wants to be connected to him. Nobody. So he was getting really nervous. And we have people, here in the United States that we want to be connected to sometimes. So, but it was interesting because they were using newspapers a lot for his story. And what they found was that this fourth great grandfather of his, Jose Sandoval, in the 1840s, was in the Senate, and he presented a proposal to stop Santa Anna from coming into this county. Well,
that was awesome.
Yeah, and so he thought that was really great because he did, and it was passed, and so he couldn't come there, but that didn't last long. There was retribution, and they said that this man, this fourth great grandfather, was sent to, he's exiled to the United States.
Yeah. Why did he come here?
That's what they exiled him to the
United States. They exiled him. Yeah.
And that's what
we normally do that.
I don't know. I guess in
That's what I
1840
wondered,
they
yeah.
did. They must have done that in 1840. And that's what I'm saying. We
Yeah,
don't
that's
know enough about, the
right.
history. We know there was a war, but we know more of our side of history than the other side
Sure.
of history. And so I don't know. I thought that was really interesting. But he
Yeah.
was able to come back. They did. He was vindicated, they said, and he was allowed to come back. And so
Wow.
I don't know what the records, what the archives are like for doing any kind of research in Mexico. And so, but I did notice they were using a lot of newspapers. So maybe perhaps there weren't too many records in an archives. I don't know. Or they just found that the newspapers were, I mean, they did do 3 people on this show. So they had to be careful,
And I think they're very selective on what they bring out as well. And like you said, I just wondered watching that if the newspapers were more of a push compared to how we use newspapers.
True. And maybe they just couldn't find the story anywhere else, but they found it in the newspaper, which, a lot of times when we can't find things on our ancestors, you go to those newspapers and you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
You have to. Right.
Yeah.
And it may be that they found the initial information in official records, but the newspaper accounts were probably more entertaining.
Oh, much more entertaining.
for the show.
Yeah. And then they had the other part of his story was they found that one of his ancestors had decided that they were going to move. They wanted to be farmers, so they bought this hacienda. Well, it turned out that this hacienda was right in the middle of these warring factions, and they were not very happy that they had moved there. And so his ancestor's son was murdered. So then the brother decided, okay, and then I'm going to pay y'all back for this. And he went and killed 3 other people. So they had this war going on. So they kind of walked right into the middle of something. But the interesting thing is when this ancestor died, they got his death certificate, and that showed the location of where they were from in Spain. So they actually had, and he'd said, we knew this line was from Spain, but we didn't know from where. And it was from the Basque region of Spain, and he had just been there. That is so interesting. Right. How many times have we watched this show and people say, are you kidding? Or I'm going there next month, or I was just there last year or whatever. But he had just been there, but he had no idea that he had family from there. I thought it was really, really interesting. They did a woman named Maria. Okay, now I'm going to butcher this one. Abramovic.
It sounds good, Maria.
Maria works and she was from communist Yugoslavia is where she was born. And what is really interesting about her is that her parents were both fought in the war. They both were military people.
Both soldiers.
They met on the battlefield, which I thought was really interesting. And they ended up being war heroes for their country. So they were very well known. That it sounded like the marriage was not a happy one. There was a lot of contention, and she kind of felt that led to some of her interesting choices in art that they were showing that she did. It was a lot of real life stuff that was kind of interesting, but for her, they were showing her that her parents were not the only military people in the family. That her grandfather George, her paternal grandfather, actually fought in World War I and in World War II, which I thought was really, really interesting. The World War I, they actually had his signature on paper, and she could see that, and she thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
And then they said, according to this 1953 CIA document, and I'm going,
CIA.
I've never pulled CIA documents, but now it makes me want to.
Yeah.
And
well,
Melissa,
people should look
tell us
into.
about,
People should look into CIA. I've never done research on CIA documents either. However, I follow a lot of archives, blogs, and mailing lists, and email, things like that. That they talk a lot about records becoming declassified every single day. There's new records becoming, and a lot of it's coming out of the U.S. National Archives. And so if anyone thinks if your ancestor might have been, watched by the CIA or could have been in those records. Think about, it makes me you think, well, no, my ancestors didn't. But think about in the United States back in the 1950s when they were dragging even like Hollywood people before Congress and accusing them of being communist. And so, even ordinary people, believe it or not, are showing up in those records. And so I'm just saying that start with the National Archives, and they should lead you to some of these records that people think, no, you can't see those records, but they're being declassified all the time.
How fun
it's
is
like
that?
when President Trump took office, one of the first things he did was to declassify a lot of records from the John F. Kennedy assassination. Why? I don't know.
Wow.
But he did. And so, they're not all declassified yet, but he did declassify, a lot of them declassified. And so there's those kind of records all the time. And when they get declassified, guess what? They become public record.
Exactly.
Well, and maybe it follows the same 72 years or 50 years, something like that. After 50 or 70, 72 years of the census. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing, the cool thing they found out from this 1953 CIA record was that her grandfather also served in World War II, and he was actually 60.
Both of them.
60 when he signed up, and he went with his sons. That is really cool.
What was his skill in the war? I don't remember. What did he do? And because if they took him being older, then there was some skill there that
you would think, unless they were just desperate at that point for soldiers. But I agree with you. Maybe he did have some kind of
special agent or something.
Yes, and maybe that's why the CIA had records of him because they didn't really explain why.
I don't remember. I don't remember that.
I know my great-great-grandfather was in the Civil War, and I did not think to look in him in the Civil War because he was in his 60s during that time period.
Oh, wow.
And Civil War is a little different, but that really is what taught me about not paying attention to age when you're looking in records, because he served in the Civil War. He was with the Union. He was in West Virginia, which became Virginia, then West Virginia. But one of his records, it says that he guarded the B&O Railroad.
Wow.
And so, and he was in his 60s.
Right.
And so I have found more than one ancestor on my side and my husband's side that were in their 50s and 60s during the Civil War. Yeah. Now, I haven't found anything like that in World War I and World War II. But, that really taught me as a genealogist, you know what? You can't have blinders on and you can't have this set thing. Okay, it's got to be this way. Or, that's exactly right. And so that really taught me not to do that.
Yeah, exactly. They also found that somebody had done, in 1910, somebody had done some work on that family, and that she was connected to this famous person from the 1300s. The line just went right up to him, and, and she was related to him. And so that was really exciting. It was like us, they said it's like being related to royalty if you're, from the States, and you get that line, and it just, that gateway ancestor, and that's pretty much what they had with that. So that was exciting. They did a little bit on her mom's side, and they discovered that there was a murder in that family, and it was a very famous murder. It turned out that this woman, I think it was her grandmother, her uncle was actually the head of the church. And that he was murdered. With like 3 other people. And so that was a story that she had heard about, but she had no idea that it was connected to her family and to her mother, because it was her mom's uncle and her mom's father. That's what it was. It was murdered. And they said no wonder that her mom was the way she was, because she told a story about how everything had to be clean. She even washed bananas, the outside before they could eat them, and that she had to sleep and she couldn't move. She just had to be, straight in the bed. And then her mom would come in at night and fix the covers around her. That everything had to be perfect all the time. And she couldn't figure out why her mom was that way. But when they started telling her this story about this trauma that her mom's family had gone through, her mom and the family had gone through, she was like, well, no wonder she had issues.
PTSD.
Yeah. No wonder.
Exactly.
Absolutely no wonder that she had issues. So again, we find out that things in our past can really, when we learn about the things in our family's past, really can come down through those generations and affect us.
Absolutely.
The third person, and I'm sorry, I'm talking through this really fast. We got 2 shows to get through. It was the artist who I've seen the painting. He was the artist that painted the painting of President Obama, but of course I didn't connect this name to him. But his name was Kehinde Wiley. He had some interesting stories too, and again, it was a military story. His great grandfather served in World War I, and which is something he had absolutely no idea about. And this was on his maternal side. And it was interesting how they showed him in the list of the soldiers in Virginia who came to Virginia. Then he was sent. He was in the Quartermaster Corps, they said, and what that group did, it was an African American group, and they just basically cleaned up after everybody. That was their job. And Shelley, the saddest thing was they were cleaning up the bodies afterwards. And I thought that was really sad too.
No, it's interesting. Remember that one show a long time ago on Gettysburg? And the actress or whoever it was, the great grandfather, that was his land or something in all the mass graves at Gettysburg, and they cleaned it up.
They cleaned it up. Yeah.
Similar type story.
Right. So that's what they were doing. They were cleaning up the bodies so they could be sent to. They were, if they were buried, they were unburying them so they could be sent to military cemeteries, national cemeteries. So that was their job, this group's job. And and then they were talking about how terribly they were treated when they came home. Here they were serving, serving, they joined, they went to fight, and then they come home to lynchings. They came home to Jim Crow laws that they were still fighting. Absolutely. This time they were fighting their own countrymen. Yeah. And so how sad the disrespect that they got when they came home. I thought that, and that's something too, I think in history, I don't remember ever hearing about that. So.
Well, I don't know if, I'm sure that Dr. Shelley has either seen this or heard of it, but Henry Louis Gates Jr. just had a 2-part series air on PBS on Reconstruction. And I had to tape it, so I'm actually in the middle of watching the second part. But, I'm not saying that I know everything, but I can say that I'm learning some things that I did not know. I honestly did not know African Americans did, when the Reconstruction first started, that they did so well and that they were making progress and they were making strides.
Oh, sure.
It was
owning land,
and
voting.
And then it turned on them. And so I'll tell you, I honestly did not know that. I'm so glad that Dr. Gates has put this, it's a 2-part series. I think it's a total of 4 hours. And like I said, I'm in the second part, but it is excellent. But we're at the part where, just like you were talking about, when they came back from France or wherever they came back from World War I. But I'm just now getting into that. But I would highly, highly recommend everyone to watch this Reconstruction series. It has been excellent.
I'll have to do that. I'll have to do that. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. The other story they told him was about his his Civil War ancestor who fought for the U.S. colored troops. And the fun thing about this story was learning about his ancestor's determination as he filed for a pension. Either one of you, would you like to talk? Either one of you like to talk about that?
No, you got it. You got it.
That's okay. Well, what I thought was
got his pension.
Number one, I'm always jealous of the union pensions because they're page after page of just information. You get a Southern one, and it's like, yeah, they fought. You know what I mean? It's like one page, maybe front and back. At least it is in South Carolina. Yeah, they fought with me. Okay. Given their pension. Why do they need it? Because we're poor, or something. But there's not the story where this pension you
hear their voice.
You hear their voice, what
You hear
he'd been
their
doing
voice.
during the war, who his master had been, you
Right.
know,
Right.
all those types of things. Well, the problem, this wasn't a straightforward pension because, as a lot of African Americans did, they changed their name. So he served with one last name, but had changed it. And when he was able to and could qualify for the pension, he was using a different last name. And times were different. You didn't have your driver's license. You didn't have a social security card. You didn't have.
The only thing you could do is have a witness.
It's all you could do.
Mm-hmm.
The people who could witness for him were living in Arkansas, and he's in Texas.
Texas.
And he's got no money. He can't get from one place to the other. But eventually he did, and they were just, a hypothesis maybe he walked because he didn't have any money. But he was able to get there, and he was able to get the proof and the witness that he was one and the same man, and he ended up getting his pension. Like 6 years after he filed, he finally got his pension. But what a wealth of information.
I love pensions.
Yeah, like you said, to hear his voice and hear what he'd been doing and all those details.
The determination is amazing. I wonder if today, will we be determined to fight something for 6 years like that?
6 years. For so much money, barely.
And we can't even equate to the $10 or whatever it was he received. But Judith Van Buskirk, she did a book called Standing in Their Own Light. And it was on the Black Revolutionary War soldiers.
Okay.
And the whole book was done on their pensions.
Oh.
And her goal was, she said, was to make these folks' lives just jump off the page.
Oh, sure.
Because it was stuff that you didn't know about, just like this guy, not knowing there was Civil War, that his ancestor fought in the Civil War or whatever, and then got a pension. But like you said, determination.
Yes.
So where did he go? Texas to Arkansas?
That's a long way back then. He couldn't just, he
it's
didn't have
still a long way.
Well,
Big old Texas.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I mean, he couldn't get on social media and say, "Hey, dude, I need you to witness for me."
No,
they said he probably,
but they weren't doing like they do now.
No. And they said he was even probably too poor just to write a letter. He had no money whatsoever. But so they were speculating. Yeah, they were just speculating that he probably walked. So I mean, they don't know for sure how he finally did that. They were speculating that. So those were some fun stories, and we learned some things that we didn't know before about different ethnic groups. And so I liked that episode. Like I said, I wasn't familiar with them, but you don't have to be familiar with whoever they're doing to learn things and to maybe get ideas for your own research. So,
I find even the ones that Dr. Gates does on Finding Your Roots that are people that I don't know.
Yeah.
They are just as interesting as the people that I do know, because it's the stories.
It's the stories, absolutely.
And it's the storytelling. It's you can, like I said, not even know these people, and when you get done hearing their story, it's like you know them.
Yes.
And
like
their families.
Record.
Right.
I want to hear what they found to connect one to another, or what steps. And of course, on TV, we're not getting all of the steps. We kind of get the beginning, and then we got the end.
Exactly. But we don't get the in between.
Excellent.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's move on to the final episode in season 5. And they call that All in the Family.
Yes.
And I think they called it All in the Family because both Joe Madison and Ty Burrell both found some things in their family that one suspected and the other had no idea of. No idea. Shelley, what happened with Joe Madison? What did Dr. Gates have to do?
Well, when they started the research, and I'll make it short because I know we're at time here.
All right.
But it ended up that the man that raised Joe, and of course Joe was actually excited about learning about his dad's family, was to find out that his father was not his father.
It's not his biological father.
Was not his biological father. And Dr. Gates goes ahead and he says, I had to call him before, you know, off air, nothing to do with being on air, calling him. I think he said it was a Saturday morning or something like that, to let him know that his father was not his father. And if you'll remember back a couple seasons ago, LL Cool J had the same type incidents, that the grandparents weren't his grandparents.
Exactly.
And so it ended up that Joe Madison, who is a radio commentator, probably for the last 30 years, maybe longer, I don't even know. I've been listening to him for about 20 years. And so they proceeded on with the show, and Cece Moore and her fabulous self. I don't even know what else to say. You know, what is in that woman's head? But she was able to bring that DNA and I'm going to say crisscross connect. And they found, you know, a link, and, you know, matching up, was that man, besides the DNA connection to what was going to be a half brother, because they found descendants of a surname that kind of changed, you know, several different, I can't remember exactly.
They said there was a pattern.
It was a pattern of misspelling of the same.
Haygood, yes.
Haygood.
Yes.
And so, and that's what they followed up. So I thought that was fabulous on Cece's part, or Johnny and them, or whoever it was, on that aspect, on the pattern of the surnames, which is like, okay, pay attention, you know.
And I think they did a great job of explaining too. Okay, so you know, this has got to be happening in Dayton, Ohio.
Yes, the timing.
We've got the timing was good. Yeah,
be there when his mother was there, which was and then he had over 25 centimorgans.
Right, they explained that too. We can do DNA from there was 3 possibilities. So they said
they were still related to the other ones too, but they were going for the father.
They needed to find the father, right? And so they did a good job of explaining how they found the descendants of the 3 possible fathers, and what the numbers would have had to have been for it to be a half sibling.
Needed that 25 and above,
and they found it. They found it.
And the pretty thing about this, and I'm saying pretty because the emotional tie of this is, once his part was over, you know, because he got through all that, got to see pictures, got to see great-grandfather, so on and so forth, learn a little bit about this history of his biological father. But as the show was going off, Joe was coming up on the porch, knocking
on that door,
brothers, you know,
which is great, because sometimes you don't get that. They don't want to deal with it, and so I think it's wonderful that they were able to. Well, he also found out, as they went back on this line, they also found out some other interesting information. They also discovered
on the mother's side
that he had that he actually is from a mixed race family.
Yes.
And they discovered that this family was first listed as white. You go back a generation, and then it's mulatto, and then you go back again, and she's listed as black, but she's living next door to the man that was the father
of her 6 kids.
Of 6, they had 6 children together. They had 6 children together, and like I said, you know, love has no bounds. You know, if you love somebody.
And I have that same scenario in my family up in Charlestown, West Virginia. The Mr. Fisher was next door. Eliza's next door. She's the mulatto, and the 6 kids. They could not live together during that time.
They couldn't. And what's really interesting is that this man, it was a Leonard. His name was Leonard.
Leonard.
He actually was a Confederate soldier.
Yes.
So he went and fought.
That got Joe.
He was, He says, okay, I can join the Sons of the Confederacy now. He said that would rile him up, but. So he actually went and he fought. He was captured, you know, he was in prison for a while. He returned home and, you know, was living next door, and they ended up having 6 kids together. So, and it wasn't something that he was trying to hide, because one of the ties that they found was a census record. She must have died, and he had taken, I think his name was Andrew. He had taken Andrew in to live, and he had his last name. So it wasn't like he was trying to pretend that this boy was not his son. Right. And so, you know, that tells you something about their relationship. If he was willing to,
and Joe said, no matter what, if two people basically, I'm going to sum it up, want to get together,
they're going to do it.
They're going to do it.
They're going to do
They're
it.
going to
They are going to do it no matter what. They will make that happen.
Absolutely. So I think he took it very well. I think when there's no hint and you don't realize that sometimes people get a little upset, but he was all good with it, and I think he understood that this seemed to have been a relationship that was a mutual between the two of them. It didn't seem to be, any bad feelings or anything going on between them. So I think he understood that, and so he got a lot of things in his journey with Dr. Gates that he was not expecting. So, and
he took it well.
He took it really well.
He took it well. Didn't he say, get out of here, or something like that? Everything, because Dr. Gates just kept throwing it at him. New stuff. And, in one sense, it's fascinating. But, the beauty of it is that he had time to process that to finish doing the show. So it turns out
back down and said, wait, this is a bit much. I need to, I don't know that I want
He got through it.
He got through it, and
he's got a brother now.
Yeah, so great, and cousins, and a whole new side of the family that he didn't know. And another interesting thing is that they showed him the photo of his father, and he said, "I've seen that face before.
I've seen that face.
I don't know when, I don't know how, but I've seen that face." Well, and he said he was worried when they first called him that his biological father was going to be somebody who was always around, like a neighbor, somebody that he knew well, that just didn't mess up. And so he said he was glad that it was, was it a one-night stand?
Somebody he didn't know.
Somebody he didn't know. So he was happy about happy about that. So anyway, then Ty Burrell's story was interesting. Fascinating story. He, of course, is an actor on Modern Family, but he had a family story. He had been told that he had a great-great-grandmother who was African American.
Right.
And he didn't know that for sure.
African American in her,
or was that? He just knew that there was something to the story. But he said when he asked his grandmother, what did his grandmother say? No way. That is not true. And it actually was her line.
Yeah.
And she probably knew it, but she just didn't want the story to get out, because some people they, depending on when they were raised and, the culture at the time, the town they were raised in, all that kind of stuff, it does a lot to you about what you want out there and what you don't want out there. But they were able to, by going back through the census, the same kind of thing. They were able to discover, wait a minute, the race on the census is changing as we go up. And what I thought was really interesting is they pulled out a photo, and they said the typical thing that we hear a lot. Well, they don't look it. They look white.
I know.
You hear that.
But what was really interesting was her. I mean, when we talked about determination and this and other, this woman and went out west. Was it Oregon?
She went to Oregon. She actually was his great-great-grandmother. Her name was Susanna Weeks.
Yes.
And she was in Oregon, and they couldn't figure out how she got to Oregon. And so they started looking at what was happening, which we always need to do. What was going on, where she was, why would she have moved? Melissa, do you remember why she moved? It was the Homestead Act.
Yes.
The Homestead Act. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we don't think, and it's just our culture and what we're taught in school, but we don't automatically think of an African-American homesteading. We just don't.
Yeah.
We just
an African-American woman.
An African-American woman on top of an African-American woman. And she did it. And she got that land.
Yeah.
And she
did
made improvements on it. They had 5 years to be able to make improvements on the land in order to keep the land, for it to be actually deeded to them. And she did it. She did everything that she needed
and you think about
and kept that land too.
Yes.
And you think about too that you think, okay, she worked hard, but you know what? You really think about it. There were families that went out
couldn't
there for
do
the
that.
homestead, a wife and a father and kids that couldn't keep the land because they could. And here she is.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure she probably had help, but I mean, you know, if a whole family can't do it and she can do it, I mean, what a feather in her cap, you know?
Yes.
That was absolutely amazing.
And then they had a picture of her.
Yeah, he got to see a picture.
I know.
Yeah. I would love somebody to show a picture of my great great grandmother.
Yes.
I got the great, but the two greats.
Yeah.
I'm missing one.
Oh yeah, yeah. And the thing is,
And she was beautiful.
My
She was beautiful, that picture.
Yes. So in that case, the family story was true. A lot of times, they're kind of, but this one was absolutely true. And the only reason they didn't know it was true because they were descendants his ancestors, her descendants in the middle, trying to say, nope.
Nope. We're not claiming any of that African American blood.
They were trying to squash that. Well, another interesting thing that they discovered is not only did they find Susanna, his great-great-grandmother, but they were able to, from Susanna's death certificate, find the name of her mother, which was Nellie Mask. And then they started looking into possibly who or where Nellie had come from. And as they did that, they were able to find an oral history. Because, you know, it's always that thing is, was it, you know, did that last name come from the slave owner? Which one, if it was? Did they just take the name? They weren't sure. So just to see, they started with the Mask families in the area to see if they could connect Nellie with the family.
Yes.
And they found a very interesting record. Anybody want to speak to that interesting oral history that they found about who Nellie was and who her mom was? Do you guys remember? They said it was an oral history.
I don't remember.
It was an oral history written by the Mask family. And they they wrote, and in it said that what was it? Dudley? The guy's name was Dudley. Dudley could not keep his hands off.
Couldn't keep his hands off of her. Nellie. Yes.
It was Jane. The mom's name was Jane. Could not keep his hands off of Jane.
Yes.
She was 13.
13. Ty struggled with that.
Ty
struggled with that.
Not unusual for that time period, even for you know, white women to be, you know, pregnant. Unfortunately, time period. But still, you know, 13 years old, and he couldn't keep her hands off. But she named him as the father of Nellie.
Right.
So here we've got another generation back. I mean, that's amazing.
I think it took him back to was that third or fourth?
It would have been, well, Susanna was his great-great, so Nellie would have been third. That'd been fourth.
Jane was the fourth. Yes.
Amazing. A lot of us can't get back to her fourth. So, you know, depending on what records are available. But I would assume, Melissa, that oral history or that written history that they found was probably in some kind of manuscript collection somewhere. Unless the family had it.
In a family collection.
Unless the family had it and was willing to share. Yeah.
It was at the house repository. That's what I call them.
The house repository. So,
that's right.
Yeah. And so, Melissa, I think that's another idea for people. Don't stop on Family Search and Ancestry and
go. That's why I teach genealogists all the time. You know, even if you do go to the archives or the library or whatever, I always tell people, you know, find out who the oldest person in the community is. You know, and if they still have their minds about them, call them, tell them your surnames, and then just see what they have to say. You know, they could say, oh, you know what, them people, their family's still here. They live just down the street. And then you can connect with them, and who knows what they might have. They might have an oral history or records that they have in the attic or in the basement, you know.
That is so true. And sometimes, you know, we have just gotten, I think, a little spoiled about just getting on our computers and thinking we can find everything. But that
you gotta go local for stuff like
that. That particular kind of record could not have been found, you know, online somewhere. I doubt very seriously that had been. I mean, it's very possible because a lot of the libraries and archives are starting to digitize some of these things. So it's possible, but unlikely. So they probably.
Well, and again, as I say, you have to go local at this, and it doesn't mean you have to physically get there, but you got to get to the local records.
You got to find somebody you can look for.
It's not all online. I mean, the majority of stuff is going to be in your local libraries, courthouses, historical societies, churches, and those house repositories. But you also have to ask questions. You know, well, wait a minute. You know, what about this? What about that?
Right.
You know,
and sometimes you just have to go and play around. I did that last week. I was in the South Carolina Historical, the archives in Charleston. It was the Historical Society's archives at the College of Charleston. And as I'm just looking through their catalog, this new record set pops up, and it's actually the enlistment records. They have got 6 files of enlistment records from the Civil War, and some of them are from Charleston, some of them are from North Carolina, and some of them are from Georgia. So I just sat there and looked through them. They have descriptions of the soldiers on these records.
I love it.
The soldier, wherever the soldier was born. I mean, a lot of them had been born, you know, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. But these foreign born, they weren't just saying I was born in France. They were saying what town in France. And I'm like, somebody's ancestor is in this record, and they're looking to see where they were born, and they can't find it. These are called special collections for a reason. They're special collections. They're
absolutely.
You've got to look for, and you've got to go read them. You can't. There's letters in there. There's all sorts of wonderful things. So take advantage. Take advantage of those.
I shared this, and Melissa, I'm going to share it again. I don't know if you had heard it, but there's Dr. Ayers out of University of Richmond, and I think it was Virginia Humanities. And what they had done was a project, and it's called The Valley of the Shadow. And it's the Virginia Humanities. Now it's used to be called Virginia Foundation of Humanities. They compared Franklin County, Pennsylvania, and Augusta County, Virginia, and they compared 1860. But what's in that comparison in this project is all online. It's the largest collection of letters, journals, and diaries of U.S. colored troops.
Oh, wow.
And people will go through and not think to go look, and he was given a talk at the Library of Virginia, and I thought, I've used that site. I didn't go look. I wasn't looking. You know, I glanced at a few. But he said in one spot, that's the largest collection of USCTs. And again, they're comparing 2 different counties from 2 different states during 1860. So you're talking about the war going on.
That's wonderful. Yeah, there's just stuff out there. We've just kind of looked.
You can see that. And what a great project to do, and to take that, you know, North and South Carolina or whatever.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So much out there. And that's, you know, watching these shows can give us little ideas about where we can look. And
absolutely,
you know, they really can. Every once in a while, I think, you know, you showed us this record. Now tell people where you found it. You're looking at these things. You're looking at these things. Now tell everybody where you found it, so that they'll know where to go look. So, but it does. It gives you ideas and possibilities of places where we can look for our own ancestors and learn our own stories. So, thank you, ladies. I know that was a quick run through of 2 shows. I appreciate you being here and helping me go through these and discuss these interesting stories and the finds that were made in these 2 shows. And we will see you next time on Gen Friends. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.